Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, Cosmopolite. Lovely to see you. Have you recovered from this past weekend? I have to say, it took me a while, that's for sure. Hello, Ramon. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How is everyone doing today? I hope you are doing well. We are now officially live on the Moan app, on YouTube, and on Facebook. So, hello, everyone. Wonderful to have you here today to chit chat about standing up after trauma. Um, this has been coming up quite a bit in conversations recently. And I actually find that um, life has a tendency to give me hints and clues as to what I should be thinking about, talking about, working with, and putting out into the world. And when these things come up over and over and over again, I listen. So here we are. I'll get things started. For those of you who are not yet familiar with me, hello. I am Miss Nookie. I am a hedonistic, dominant, cuckoldress pimptress who is polyamorous and monoromantic. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am the founder of Dating Kinky, a kinky education and connections site. Thank you so much for joining me today for Throwback Thursday. So, Throwback Thursday is something that I have been doing on my podcast for a while, but recently I decided to start doing it as a live option so that I could interact with you with content that I've put out into the world many moons ago and might have additional thoughts or insight into, and that I can share with you and get your questions and comments live based on what it is that we're talking about. Now, for those of you who are not aware, I actually have my own trauma. I was in an abusive relationship for a good portion of my early adulthood. My husband was an alcoholic and bipolar, and I rode that train all the way to the end, or at least as far as I could. And when I came out of it, I had to find my own path back to me and also forward towards the me I wanted to be. So I do have some experience in standing up after trauma. And for those of you who follow me, you might have seen yesterday where I talked a bit about how the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial actually gave me an aha moment and helped me realize that there are 3 stages to trauma recovery, at least in my experience. And 2 of those stages were talked about in the trial, and those are therapy, where you listen to, believe, and support your client. There are forensics, where you dig down into what happened and you pick it apart and you put it all back together again. And then there's coaching, which is where you figure out where you want to go and what you need to do in order to get there. So for those of you who might still be wondering about what you might be able to do with some of your trauma, that might be a fun listen or read or watch on YouTube to get a feel for some of the things that I did specifically after my own trauma, and how those have affected me moving forward as well. Also, how those are important to timing. For example, when somebody is still in trauma and they're trying to process the fact that they have been traumatized, that is not the time to start picking apart, their lives and saying, well, what happened where? That is the time to listen and to support and to validate their experience. It's a little later that you want to start really getting down into the nitty gritty, and even later after that you want to start coaching them on moving forward. So I think that that's pretty important. This that I'm going to be talking about today is actually sort of the flashbacks of trauma, and what happens during your recovery as you're starting to stand up from your trauma, what happens. And so that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. And I wrote this back in 2015. And I was having a tough time with some negative experiences that were resurfacing for me for no obvious reasons at random times. Not often, maybe once every 10 or 15 days or so, but they would pop into my head and sort of take over my thoughts in a weird, dark, morose, meh sort of way until like I realized what was happening and I was able to shake them off. No idea why. It lasted for a few months. And then in 2018, I experienced the same thing after a bad car accident. The first time I experienced it was on a car trip to Tennessee in January. The accident had actually happened in 2017 in August. A friend was driving us across some mountains, and suddenly in my head, like I just sort of imagined or hallucinated the car just driving straight off the edge of the mountain and plunging below. Maybe imagined isn't quite the word. I felt it happen in a split second, which made like zero sense because the car accident I was in 2017 had nothing to do with mountains or plummeting to my death. But these sort of split second musings would pop up for me over the next 2 years into 2020, infrequently, but always when I was driving and always something where I was going to die in my car. Now, in 2017, we actually got sideswiped and went up into the air and came back down, and the car was crushed in ways that are horrifying to consider that there were human bodies in it. And I still flinch when people nudge too close to a car that I'm in from their lane because of that sideswiping. So part of what I'm trying to explain to you is that recovering from trauma includes things that don't necessarily seem to make a whole lot of sense in relation to your trauma. I mean, sometimes it can, but sometimes it can be seemingly unrelated. It's your brain firing things off. And this is important to understand and to give yourself the compassion to accept and to get through these things. So in January of 2016, I wrote about recovering from trauma. And I sometimes go back to that writing that I did for someone else to help them, just to remind myself. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So for those who stand up after trauma, one of my readers, who has become an online friend, wrote to me looking for advice on a situation. And could I please recommend any links or writings that might apply? I could not think of anything written specifically to address what she went through. And frankly, I wanted to write as soon as possible because it was evident that she was hurting. So at the time, having been through no few issues and challenges myself, and having wanted to write something in response to, some of the things that have been happening in my local kink community, I just wrote from my heart. So there will be times when trauma will fill your mind. You'll go over it and over it again and again and again, like an endless vine. Dating myself there. Y'all remember vines from way back then? Just over and over and over and over. Sometimes, though, this is needed for processing. It's your brain trying to get to the end of it. It's kind of like, and I'm editorializing here, it's kind of like when you get a bit of song stuck in your head, right? And you just, that refrain keeps going over and over and over again. You know what makes that go away relatively quickly? Listening to the full song, because your brain is trying to find the end. Your brain is trying to find a solution, a completion, right? Of whatever it is that you experienced. And so that processing is needed. Give yourself the space and time to go through that. 2, life will continue. It is okay to allow yourself to be sucked back into the daily act of living. This is how we heal. It doesn't mean your trauma means less. it means you are moving on. 3, at random times through your life, you may get flashbacks. You may be working out and it'll run through your head along with like half a dozen things you could have done differently. Let it happen. I know it can be overwhelming at first. Eventually, you'll be able to continue what you're doing, but allow it to play out. Again, this is how your brain helps you look for potential solutions for your future to avoid similar situations. A lot of people seem to feel like that's your brain saying, oh, you could have done this, you could have done this, you could have done this, and blaming yourself. I choose to look at it a completely different way. It's your brain saying, if you could do this in the future, you can avoid this ever happening again. And by allowing my brain to give me those suggestions, I feel that it allows my brain to also feel satisfied that moving forward, we are prepared for that potential trauma happening again. 4, scening again, if this is a kink trauma, having sex again, trusting again, driving again, whatever it is that your trauma is related to, can be hard, right? It can be nerve-wracking, but also fulfilling at the same time. And if you can get to a point where it's simply pleasurable and not a source of anxiety, you'll feel proud of yourself. And look forward to that because you will get to that point. It may not happen now, and that's okay, right? Hold that space for yourself, but it will happen again in the future. And you can promise yourself that, and you can go back over it in your head and you can say, you know what? Next time, now that I've been through this, next time I can do these things that my brain is suggesting. I can protect myself better. I can make these changes. Or in some cases, you can say to yourself, that thing that happened, like the car accident that happened to me, there was nothing that could have been done about it. And look, we made it through on the other side. And we find happy days and we find love and we find light and things are good, right? We made it through. We survived and we're potentially thriving now. 5, your limits are yours. And by limits, I'm talking about what limits and boundaries do you need to set to protect yourself as you heal, or to assure that that same kind of trauma, for example, in my situation, abuse, does not walk back into your life, right? Your limits are yours. You have a right to draw them wherever you want them to. And you don't owe anyone anything of yourself that you're not willing to give outside of, your basic parent-child relationships. But you don't owe another functional adult in a relationship with you anything you are not willing to give them. Use your limits and boundaries to your benefit. 6, you are not damaged goods. This is something that happened to you, right? It is not who you are. Everyone has problems and bad experiences. Every damn one of us. A lot of people, like people who don't know me, people who don't read a lot of my writings or whatever, they'll get on one of my writings, or they'll get on one of my videos or whatever, and they'll be like, oh yeah, so easy for you to be peppy. You've never had a hard day in your life. Bullshit, right? And we can't say that to others either. And we also can't get into the whole oppression Olympics. Mine are worse than yours are worse than mine. This person's is what. Everyone has problems and bad experiences. You are not damaged goods. Okay? Give yourself that gift. 7, chances are that a friend or family member will doubt your feelings, will doubt your experiences in this trauma. They will think you're exaggerating. They might say you brought it upon yourself for some reason. They might say you're being dramatic, that you're blowing it all out of proportion. Those are the people you don't need in your life, right? Or at least you don't need in your life while you're processing and standing up after trauma. You need friends and professionals who will support you. Keep in mind, though, most of those people, those friends, those family members who doubt you, who think you're exaggerating, who try to get you to put it away and to heal more quickly than you're healing or whatever it is, they do that because they are afraid. They're afraid to admit it could happen to them. They're afraid that they might get blamed. They're afraid that they failed you and that they continue failing you because you're still sad, right? They're afraid if they admit it happened to you and that it wasn't your fault, that it could happen to them through no fault of their own, or that they might be responsible somehow for starting to speak up or have tough conversations with others. It's not their fault that they are cowards. And we've all been cowards at one point or another in our lives, every single one of us. You know, we're not always able to play the knight, not even for ourselves, because in a lot of the trauma that each one of us has experienced, we didn't even stand up for ourselves. We can't blame them for not having the strength to stand up for us in their own minds. What we can do, though, is set them aside for a while, because we cannot allow them to drain our energy or to make us doubt ourselves even more while we are trying to stand up after trauma. Are you with me on that? It's not their fault they are cowards. It doesn't mean you have to love them less. It just means that you can set limits and boundaries and not let them drain you or doubt you when you are trying to recover yourself after trauma. By speaking up about your trauma, you have proven that you are resilient, you are strong, you are courageous, you are powerful, you are brave, and you are a fighter because you have fought your way through to the other side. This is what I'm telling you, and this is what I hope you know in your heart and your mind. Stick to what you know is true. Know this is true. Understand and feel compassion for those who do not have the strength to see the world for what it truly is. And find other strong people to support you, to help you as you heal yourself, to fill you up as you recover and you move forward in a better place. And in this original writing, I asked you to look up kintsugi, Kintsugi, the art of repairing ceramic with gold, the art of making something beautiful from something broken, and the broken pieces defining what is beautiful about it. Again, that's kintsugi, Kintsugi. And think about that, right? Think about what it means to have fractures. Think about the people in your life who are imperfect and how much you love them and how much their imperfections have shaped them into the people you love, right? So, this is for all of you who stand up after trauma. You make the world better and give others hope. Now, I'm going to go on and I'm going to share some of the responses and conversations that I had, but I'd like to touch base on a couple of things that have been said in the chat. Roger says, my daughter's been diagnosed with PTSD. I know what happened, and I still catch myself wondering if she did something, even though I know she didn't. Exactly. So this is a function of our brains. Our brains want to look for blame, for reason, for patterns, because in the case of your daughter, you want to be able to say to your daughter, this will keep you safe from here on in. And you want to be able to feel to yourself that your daughter is safe now, right? That there's something that she can do moving forward that will always, always, always keep her safe. And you can't. Cobalt says, it's hard to hear that. I'm terrified of the next step in recovering, but I signed the release for a new eval last night. Congratulations. I mean, it is terrifying to take these steps, right? You don't know what's going to happen, but it's worth it long term. So the responses and the conversations that we had. Blood and Roses said, yes, good advice. One other thing I've noticed is that others want you to make them feel comfortable and okay. They expect you to squash your feelings to make them feel better, to deny what you're experiencing so they can feel normal around you. That goes with your point of you're exaggerating. They want you to get over it, to move on, get back to the old you. Don't want you to talk about it or to be sad or angry. Don't let them do that. You have to process this in your own way, in your own time. I went through that with my stillbirth, and it came from some surprising sources. It hurt. I've also seen others go through it with assaults and illnesses. I hope this person feels pride in their strength. That's tough, right? When the people around you are not only telling you that you're exaggerating or that there might have been something better that you could do, but also wanting you to make them feel better, wanting you to say, no, it's okay. I'll be fine, when you're not ready to say that. Andalusite said, unfortunately, this seems to come up all too often, so I'm a little surprised you couldn't find anything suitable written addressing it. I'm glad you did, though. You're eloquent and caring and commonsensical as always. Lioness in DC, painful and beautiful at the same time, so true as well from my experience. So these are people who have experienced trauma and who are responding to this. Carrie XX89 said, very well said, thank you. I worry. Am I strong enough to stand up again this time? How do you find the courage to keep on? Queen Sassy chimed in and said, I'm really glad I read this. I hadn't given it much thought to number 7, the part about friend or family member doubting your feelings. She says, it makes so much sense. Of course they feel that way. I'm daft at times. Zika Blue shared her experience. After trauma, EMDR from a trained professional helps with the anxiety, obsessive intruding memories, and preservation of being stuck at the point in which the trauma occurred. It is life-changing. So there's something you might want to take a look into. So I bring this back to you. What are your thoughts? Have you stood up after trauma? And if so, what has helped you take those steps? Cobalt says, when I first tried to talk about CSA as an adult, I was often told they didn't want to hear about my sexuality. Then an ex told me it was my karma for being evil. Wow. So, any questions, any comments, anyone on the Moan app that would like to come up to the stage and have a bit of a chat? I'm absolutely open to any additional clarification or thoughts or ideas, sharing about trauma. There we go. Hello, hello, Cosmopolite. Good to see you today.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you.
So one of the things that I found to be helpful, ironically, was learning about trauma, studying trauma. The other thing that I have found to be helpful is having people who can at least validate how I feel. I feel like it's important to validate how people feel. You don't always have to agree with everything that they say, but validating how people feel goes a long way.
Absolutely. So learning about trauma can actually help you deal with your own trauma. You begin to see why you feel the way that you feel and understand yourself better. And then, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And then surrounding yourself with people who will validate that and say, you have a right to feel the way that you feel. You absolutely, are valid for that. You're not being over extreme. You are experiencing what you're experiencing, and that is your right, and it's your experience, and I'm here to support you and to help you with whatever it is that you might need in order to make that happen. So yeah, absolutely. And for me, I think that a big portion of the turning point was first absolutely recognizing and admitting that I had experienced trauma, and then digging down into it and really finding the bits and pieces that traumatized me and being able to, again, go over them in my mind and say, this is what I could have done differently, not because I'm blaming myself, because I'm not, but because I didn't know then. And by using then, I can know better now and into the future. Right. And also to be able, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think also a lot of people have struggle with internalized ableism, where they kind of beat themselves up for, not recovering fast enough.
Yes.
So one of the things for me, to be more specific about, learning about trauma, was learning how our brain processes it, and being able to separate that from, this is a choice versus this is what my body is doing. This is what my brain is doing. Being able to understand that, trauma responses more, I think, helped me with that.
Yes, I think that's actually really critical, because we talk a lot, and I talk a lot about being in charge of your emotions, emotional intelligence, being able to pause before reacting. The challenge there is, like anything else, sometimes you don't have any control over what's going on in your brain. I mean, it is just what it is. Even every moment of every day, there are times things will pop into my brain. I'm like, what the hell? That's okay. This is your brain. It has to do these things. A healthy brain is going to do these things. It's going to bring things up. It's going to allow you to process them. And sometimes it's going to do it at really inopportune times. It is what it is, right? The other thing to keep in mind is that just like when you're starting, I don't know, a new diet, right? Or a new sport, you may have done similar things before. You may have gotten them under control. You may have even mastered them, but a new one takes new practice. And the same thing will be true is if you have a new traumatic memory, it will take new practice to work with and understand your brain related to that memory, and being able to handle the emotions that come up as a result of that, as opposed to, something completely different. Breaking your ankle as a child is one kind of trauma. Getting hit is another kind of trauma. Being emotionally abused is a third kind of trauma. There are so many different types of traumas, and don't think that just because you've been through one, you're going to be excellent at going through another. Our brains don't work that way. Yes, some of the skills are going to translate over, but it still takes time, and it's good. It still take processing. Cosmopolite, did you have more?
The other thing I was just going to say is that like trauma compounds.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're one of those people that's like, oh, nope, I can go through traumatic things and those don't affect me, that will catch up to you.
Yeah.
Because it definitely caught up to me. So
yeah.
So I think I agree with everything that you're saying. And I think that there's so much of a focus sometimes on just like controlling the emotions rather than, you said before you were talking about getting to the end of the song.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important. We're so busy trying to control the emotions and distract ourselves that we're not going through the motions.
We're not finishing our song.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And that's how we get through it. We can't go around it. We can't jump over it. We can't avoid it for forever. We have to go through it. And in order to do that, we actually have to experience those emotions rather than trying to control them. And that helps us get better control of ourselves.
You just reminded me of something. For those of you out there who might be a little bit geeky and who enjoy like science fiction, fantasy type stuff, and who might have read Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, there are two different types of magic, I guess, in this series, and one is Sidon and one is Sidar. And the men, they wrest, control, and fight for their power, whereas the women give themselves to the power. They flow with the power. And I think that these are both techniques that we can use in some of this trauma. A lot of times we focus too much on fighting it and trying to control ourselves. And I like to say that, we can't, no human can control another human. We can only control ourselves, and that imperfectly. Keep that imperfectly in mind, because there are times when we don't want to control ourselves. We don't want to wrest our emotions out of ourselves. We want to give into them and flow with them and guide them from inside, because that's what it takes to complete that incomplete pattern, to complete the incomplete song, the incomplete book, the incomplete TV show, whatever it is that's going on in our mind that our brain keeps coming back to like a broken record. Right? Like we have to complete that. And sometimes that means giving into and experiencing it in order for our brain to say, okay, got it, can move on to the next bit. It makes a huge difference. Cobalt says, Hurt people hurt people. So sometimes we can compound a trauma-based self-hate with guilt and shame for letting pain leak onto those we love. So that's huge, right? And I actually think 2 weeks from now, in fact, I just scheduled it today. I'm going to be talking about how we often, rather than let pain leak onto those we love, how often we harm those we love with our fear and our anger by lashing out at them. And yeah, it is a function of hurt people hurt people. It's also a function, though, of when we're in that state, we want somebody there with us, right? We don't want to feel all alone a lot of the time. And so if somebody hurts us, we want to hurt them back, to bring them into solidarity with us because we were in love and now one of us is hurt. So that one of us is like, well, now let's be in hurt together. And how breaking that cycle can do so many wonderful things for a relationship. Next week, I'm doing Friend Zoned. That's because you're a butt nugget, where I'm going to be talking about the friend zone, and we're going to get a little sillier. We're going to do a little bit of ranting. We're going to talk about entitlement behaviors and so on and so forth. But then, the week after that, we're going to talk about what it means when we lash out to the people we love, the harm that we're doing, not only to them in that moment, but to ourselves and to the relationships that we have. And more importantly, we're actually convincing ourselves that this is okay, this is normal, and this is what we should and can expect from others. So keep an eye out for that. Again, it'll be Thursday, but I think I might have to reschedule the one in 2 weeks. I might have to schedule it for earlier in the day. I know I just scheduled it for 1 p.m., but I got a call back saying that I might have to go get a medical thing done. So if so, I'll probably schedule that earlier in the day, maybe at 11 a.m. or thereabouts, just to make sure that we still get that going. Or I might make it a Friday. We'll figure that out in between, but keep an eye on that if that one is something that you're interested in, because it does make a huge difference if you can learn in your life and in your relationships how not to be a hurt person who hurts persons, right? How not to take that out on others, and how not to want to take that out on others, which, honestly is really hard. But with practice, we can make sure that we don't harm each other in those sorts of experiences. Okay. Any additional questions, comments, thoughts, ideas? If not, I will go ahead and start wrapping things up. Thank you again for those of you who joined me. I appreciate your time today. Please reach out if you have any additional questions or comments. You can reach me through comments on YouTube. You can reach me on the Dating Kinky Facebook page. You can always reach me on Moan. And of course, if you're on FetLife, you can hit me up at Nookie Notes. And, I'd love to see you at any of our educational events. Stop by and say hello. Check out our Plus membership if you're so inclined. It's a whopping $10 a month, and it gets you all sorts of cool educational stuff like this, including my books and so on and so forth. But yeah, have an amazing day, every single one of you. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you next week, if not sooner. Bye, y'all.